7, followed by the de Havilland Vampire, a T-55 export version. The third in line comes the de Havilland Venom. We watched these venerable aircraft take off. Remember, that first aircraft you see taking off was built in 1949, making it one of, if not the oldest, jet flying in the United Kingdom. Followed closely by the other two twin-tailed machines designed by de Havilland. Now I have 15 years to rebuild from a group of parts, and here they come from the left, the three aircraft, the Meteor, followed by the Vampire, with the Venom coming up the back. The Venom was a much faster version of the Vampire. I think all of you will notice the very different appearance of these aircraft, not only compared with what we saw in the shape of the Tornadoes, but even there in the sky, two different designs from two different companies, both produced during World War II. Part of the problem for these early engines, and what you see are all British designs and British engines, is a very short jet pipe that they needed to have because they weren't very powerful. The Meteor, the Gloster team, put their engines on the wing. The de Havilland team put their engines in the mid-fuselage, but then split the tail. So you've actually got a very short distance between the intake and the outlet of these jets. Now, that accounts for the rather odd appearance. You'll also note that they are not swept wing. Again, the first generation of British design was pretty conventional. It could almost have been an aircraft with a propeller on the front. And that's pretty much what they did. A conventional design, but with jet power. Their counterparts at that time, in the 40s, the mid-40s, over in Germany, the Messerschmitt company produced the 262 with swept wing. And of course, subsequently, many of the post-war designs had swept wing. But Britain kept with the fixed-wing design, and we've got very capable aircraft as a result. We saw wide export use also. The Meteor went on, was sold all over the world. Many different versions of it. The other version operated by the Classic Aircraft Trust is the NF-11, which was a much later fighter version with a big radar in the nose. Not hugely different from this particular aircraft, the all-silver trainer. Quite valuable having a trainer aircraft. The aircraft itself has a fully functional back cockpit. That means we can train pilots to fly twin-engine jets. The Vampire following it there and just doing a wing over in front of us is also a two-seater. It does allow those rare skills, these vintage aircraft that you get into a cockpit, they're very different from modern cockpits, allows those skills to be honed and allow a whole generation of more modern pilots to become familiar with this older technology. Up with the de Havilland built the Venom, and the Venom that we see passing in front of us is in fact a Swiss-built machine, Swiss-operated. The fuselage pod, like the Vampire before it, is made of wood. It's made of balsa wood, which is one reason why these aircraft often don't last very long when left outside. They actually rot. But this particular machine was kept in pristine condition by the Swiss. They used to have a different nose, for those who care about these details. The Swiss operated with a very strange pointy nose. The shape of the wing is also different. It has a slightly swept leading edge and a much thinner wing compared to the Vampire. Again, showing how immediately after the war, a lot of work went into understanding aerodynamics and designing faster and better material. And the Vampire, which was a very effective trainer in its latter years, as we've seen with the T-55 flying today, was replaced in frontline service by the Venom. And the Venom saw service all over the world, operated in Aden, Singapore, the ability to launch missiles, drop bombs, 4 20mm guns in the nose. Gives you a sense of the idiosyncrasies of early flying. And of course, with the other two aircraft that we're seeing, the trainer versions, worth remembering that there was a very high attrition accident rate in those early days. It's entirely appropriate that we should have preserved some of these aircraft to help remind us what that de Havilland Venom FB4. And here comes the Vampire from the left. They're quite a sprightly machine. Denoted a much wider fuselage pod, also of wood, side-by-side cockpit. I flew down here today in the Vampire. There's not a lot of room. Every time the pilot wants to scratch his nose, he hits the passenger quite hard. You need to have a good level of cooperation in that cockpit. And well imagine what it was like to have actually learned how to fly on those aircraft side by side. The exasperation of the instructor readily apparent to the student sandwiched in, literally, on his right. The nose, in fact, bears a huge resemblance to the two-seat de Havilland Mosquito nose. Again, made of wood, 1940s design. It has almost identical cockpit canopy to the later Mosquitoes. It's a fighter version of the Mosquito. So again, typical of British design work. Take one good design, take bits off it, put it onto the next type, and make that one fly. It's again a very valuable aircraft for us to have. Part of the theme that the Classic Aircraft Trust has developed is 1950s flying and 1950s training aircraft. Now this aircraft doesn't look like a trainer given the camouflage colours it's wearing at the moment. I can tell you that as and when we get the money, we would like to repaint it. We'd like to repaint it in the similar colours it would have worn as a trainer aircraft with the Royal Air Force back in the 50s, and it would look much like the Gloster Meteor that we have. It would be silver with yellow stripes. And indeed the Royal Air Force did for many, many years operate a Meteor and a Vampire as a heritage flight until a tragic accident brought that to an end in the 1980s. What we would like to be able to do is recreate that and bring back to life RAF flying training of that era. The colours it wears today are in fact curiously colours worn by a Vampire while in Royal Norwegian Air Force service and repainted with RAF markings for its return ferry flight to the UK. A lot of these aircraft were recycled and resold to fresh users when they had finished active service with their first user. And again, this aircraft we can display today because it was kept beautifully by the Swiss. They would have had it also in a silver finish. Very enjoyable aircraft to fly in, apart from the fact there's no space. It is very small. A tremendous view out of the front. Here we have John Dodd bringing it up over the top. Coming right the way over. Again, it's remarkable to think that that is a 1940s design, built and used right the way through the 50s and 60s. Very elegant looking aircraft, with its straight wings and twin tail. Powered controls, it's quite light on the controls. As you can see, fully aerobatic. The two-seat Vampire did carry guns, could carry the 20mm guns that the Venom carried, so it could be used as a more active, angry aircraft if necessary. And fitted with ejector seats. The original Vampire T-11s didn't have seats. At least they had seats, but they didn't have ejector seats, I think it's fair to say. Mine has the seats.
Please report to the Lost Children tent where your grandson is waiting. If you don't know where the tent is, please ask any member of staff. That's David Hales. Please report to the Lost Children tent. Thank you.
And here comes the Meteor, flown by Dan Griffith. Quite a performer, this aircraft, but again, what you see today is not the full extent of its performance capabilities. This is a very rare aircraft indeed. As I mentioned earlier, built in 1949, making it a vintage aircraft by any standards. Certainly older than me and most of the people here, no doubt. A beautiful aircraft, beautifully restored over 16 years. This was a labour of love from a very dedicated team. Now, the financing of that aircraft falls on the shoulders of the Classic Aircraft Trust, and is one of the most important aircraft that we operate. Dan brings it around for a steep turn, fully capable of flying on one of its engines. In fact, on the way over, Dan would shut one of them down, cruise on a single engine, far more fuel efficient. But of course, as he will tell you, the skill is in flying it on one engine and landing it on one engine. With the engines out there on the wings, you get this asymmetric pull. Knowing how to deal with that is quite an important skill. And needless to say, the authorities here want to make sure that anyone who flies that aircraft knows how to deal with the case of an engine failure. This particular aircraft, during its time with the Royal Air Force, had quite a number of accidents typical of the aircraft of that period. It was rebuilt on each occasion, went in and out of training service, and ended up finally being withdrawn from the Air Force and stuck on gate guardian duties, left outside for a while. What you actually see today is that aircraft plus lots of bits of other aircraft, all brought lovingly together and over a long period of time reassembled into this particular machine. And brings it back around. What we also hope we can do at some future date is display this aircraft alongside the later NF-11 Meteor, also operated out of Coventry. Two versions of this machine. Of the other three operated worldwide, one is a single-seater in Australia, the last of the single-seaters that still flies, an F Mark 8. And there are the two Martin Baker machines, which look very much like this, other than they had a different tail unit, and they are used to test ejector seats with an open rear cockpit. That may be testament to the design that it's still useful as a working tool. Then brings the Meteor back for a slow pass via the plan form. The T7 keeps the original shape of the tail. The later version, the F8, had a redesigned tail unit which gave better stability and control. A lot of the early design work on jets was hit or miss. But as we can see today, this aircraft is certainly very elegant with its long nose, its long greenhouse cockpit. But again, not a lot of room inside these aircraft. The layout of the cockpit is, for those unfamiliar with 1950s or 1940s layout, quite peculiar. See the Meteor coming straight towards us, and bringing up the platform against the sky. The bulge underneath it, of course, is the fuel tanks. We noted the fuel consumption of these aircraft is significant, so that needs to be filled up before we launch the aircraft. There are, of course, hard points under the wings for further fuel, drop tanks where necessary. Okay, this aircraft doing its display at between 250 and 300 knots. Dan has a reputation for displaying these aircraft with a certain amount of panache. He has years of displaying jets of various kinds. He's one of the real enthusiasts of flying the vintage jets, having flown virtually every type. Used to fly Harriers in the Royal Air Force, so one of the most experienced of his generation, graduate of the Empire Test Pilot School, and he still does a lot of training. Again, invaluable to have him and this aircraft together. Again, John Corley the Classic Aircraft Trust's pilot, will be learning to fly this aircraft during the season.
Mark had, of course, the new Navy Lynx. That will be flying up and down just to position a little bit before it departs. And then we're into the next act after the Antonov that we're just about to see. We're expecting at around